Hey folks, it's Nate back with another Iron Age comic review, and today we are looking at Nosferatu from Narhwahl. And this is a campaign I have been looking forward to for a while because I have read most of Narwhal's stuff, but I tend to buy the base campaign option when I back a project, both because it lets me back more campaigns and because when I do a review, I like to look at it from the basic experience that is most available to everyone, the experience which I think a piece of mass media should really be judged by. And that meant I couldn't get the Narwhal sketchbooks, which meant I never got to see Nosferatu as he was producing it. But now there is a separate campaign exclusively for this, and I was pretty psyched to see it. Let me start by, as usual, discussing the item itself. This is a pretty good book. Most of Narwhal's books come in a great physical package. They usually come perfect bound like this. They have a nice matte interior paper. It's got a finish on it, but it's not a bright gloss that I often feel makes a book unreadable. And it comes with some pretty nice add-ons. I guess these aren't really add-ons, like stretch goals might be the better word, or just default packaging. We get a sticker, so you can put the Narwhal branding on all your gear, and we get a couple of nice prints from various art that comes along with the project. I believe this was actually the cover of one of the bonus add-ons from another campaign, which is not what we have here. We have art by Alejandro Mirabel on the cover of this. It is a great piece as well. So all in all, pretty good. It is a nice, simple campaign at a reasonable price point. I believe this was $15 or $20. And it gives you a nice black and white book. And that is thematically appropriate for a number of reasons. If you're not familiar with what Narwhal was doing in this project, well, before I talk about that, we should probably get an important part of this review out of the way. The physical project and the add-ons are pretty objective. But before we get to talking about the art and the story, I should point out that Narwhal is someone that I have worked with and worked for in the past. We have a working relationship. I consider him a very close acquaintance and a friend. And that does color reviews. It does make it hard to objectively review a product that he has put out. All I can really do is offer what I think is the fairest review I'm capable of and make you aware of this relationship so that you can take it into account when judging what I say about the project. So, what is happening here? This is something very interesting. Nosferatu is a vampire story that was made as a film, a black and white, not necessarily no sound, but before talkie films came out. So they call it a silent film. Of course, it did have a soundtrack that went along with it, which is really, honestly, a very strong emotional signifier from the sound design. And I think there were also some sound effects sometimes. I don't know about this film. I've never gone out and watched it, even though you can find it on YouTube for free. I wanted to experience the story directly through this. But he is taking that film and he is turning it into a graphic novel. And that is interesting because they say it's very easy to take a graphic novel and turn it into a film. The graphic novel can basically serve as your storyboards to a certain extent, depending on how much work you have to do with it when you're adapting it. So going the other way is a very interesting exercise in storytelling, and it requires Narwhal to make a number of decisions ranging from how many panels he will devote to a shot, especially if it was a long shot in the movie, to composition and how he will address things like the Nosferatu coming out of the darkness, things he does a lot of interesting work with in this story. Because it was a silent film, all of the dialogue was actually written to appear in text, which also I think makes it easier to adapt to the page, because they were cognizant of not giving their characters a lot of things to say that would eat up a lot of text space in a book like this. I think if you were to try and do this for a modern movie, especially a modern movie that is not very heavy in action, say maybe something like Stranger Than Fiction, there might be parts where you would have to seriously pare down the dialogue just because people spend so much time talking in a movie like that. And that can be a detriment if you were to try and do something like this, but not so much in a silent film because, again, uh, there was dialogue in these kind of things, and there were also setting cards and a number of other things, but they all had to appear on the screen and be read by the audience. And you didn't want to leave just a screen with a bunch of text on it up for your audience very long. So all of that dialogue interspersed into the movie had to be pretty short and punchy, which again makes it well suited to something like this. I don't know if Narwhal has padded out the dialogue or done or condensed dialogue from various scenes. That might be an interesting thing to dive into at some point. Crimson Rogue has a whole YouTube channel that is dedicated to the adaptation of books to movies, and looking at this going the other way would be an interesting exercise, but not one that I think is really appropriate to this video. I may tackle it at some point. It would, of course, require that I watch Nosferatu, and that is a bit of a time commitment. But one I might be willing to make for an interesting intellectual exercise. It's not something I'm going to definitely commit to, but if you're wondering, it is an idea that I have on the back burner. So let's talk a little bit about the art in here. Narwhal has very, very simplistic art, and I don't say that as a knock to it. He uses very light line work. There's not a lot of cross hatching. He does use shading quite a bit, even in his black and white work. This and Foreign Agent, he both uses essentially screen tones or very simple 4 or 5 value shading to create really dramatic scenes. And I think I think he has gained a sense of light and composition, which a lot of people who put more emphasis on their rendering, their detailed line work, that they may have lost sight of. Of course, he is also, in this case, operating with the movie as a guide to go off of. So, again, how much of this is shot for shot and how much of this is Narwhal's own sense of what is happening? Well, I actually think you can tell to a certain extent. And again, I think this is something that would be interesting to look at in that careful composition. But that said, let's look at a few things that happen here. We have this page. This page shows us it shows us our protagonist looking out at the water, and then the Nosferatu kind of sneaking into town off of a ship. And many of these shots are clearly just from the movie. I would say this shot of the heroine looking at the water, these landscape shots setting up the church tower and the boat. Those look like they're straight out of the film. However, some of these shots of the Nosferatu running, like him dashing across the gangplank, and again across the a kind of a from above looking slightly down. I'm sure there is a sequence like that in the movie, and probably not with a whole lot of movement in it, given the technology they were working with. But the choice of which moment to show and the composition of it, I see a lot more of Narwhal's sense of flow and gesture in it. So that is very interesting. That said, this art is not going to be for everyone. Narwhal's style is very loose. It is very sketchy, and especially at the beginning, because he did this over the course of 3 projects, it was not quite as tight and expressive as it would be later. I will say that by the 3rd act, which I believe was put out about at the same time as Earthbound Part 2, we see some much better command of facial expression and lighting and shape than we do in the early part of the book. It's very interesting to read. I really love the level of detail and the shading of the Nosferatu's face. It emphasizes how alien and animalistic the creature is. It does a great deal of mood setting, just the way the faces are drawn and the way they are lit. It's very good visual storytelling there. So There's also some interesting progressions of panels. Let me see if I can find one of the ones that really jumped out at me. You can tell that Narwhal is working to uh, find the important moments in a visual sequence and illustrate them. Um, here's a good one. Here we see Renfield, and he's kind of in an insane asylum, and um, he steals a guy's newspaper and reads it and realizes Nosferatu is coming. And that moment where he's just dangling from the windowsill is a really nice touch. A lot of people would not include that as they were thumbnailing out a comic book. It could be considered a waste of paneling, but it gives us a sense of how hard Renfield is working, how dedicated he is, getting himself up to look out there and look for his master, the Nosferatu. So there's some really nice touches in here as we see Narwhal's sense of timing and visual storytelling develop. Finally, I guess I should address the story, even though since this is the adaptation of a film, it's reasonable to say that it's unclear how much of a hand Narwhal had in that. Clearly, his traditional trademark quippy dialogue with a strong sense of back and forth and very snappy lines is not present as much. That's not the way movies were written back in the teens and 20s of the 20th century, and that's an interesting choice. Narwhal could have tried to update this dialogue to make it more conversant with modern sensibilities. I kind of like it being a little archaic. It adds to the flavor and the sense of time and place that this has. Technically, this story takes place in the late 1800s, really just 20 or 30 years before the movie itself would have been made, I believe. Let me see. Does he say in here when the original Nosferatu was? He does not. Okay. But the year of the story is 1892. And if you consider that this was made probably somewhere between the 20s and the 30s, before talking pictures came in the 40s, this is not that far removed from the time period in here. So while, yes, the general conventions of speaking would have changed, the rate at which dialect and affect changed was not as fast because changes in the way people spoke did not propagate nearly as fast until mass media came in. At the same time, it's also interesting to note that our language has, in many ways, stagnated as compared to before mass media came in, but neither here nor there. The point is, keeping this gives the story a much better sense of time and place, which I like. The story itself is a simple morality tale about sacrifice in the face of evil, and it's pretty good. It's simple, it's straightforward. Not exactly a happy story, as many morality tales are not, but I think it's very effective in getting across what it wants to tell and getting that emotional payoff without being very blatant or in your face about what's going to happen. So it is a good read. Do I recommend this story, though? That is a little bit harder because this story has a lot going for it. There's some great visual storytelling in here, and if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. But it is not. Narwhal stories are really best when they have this really frantic pace to them. His simple art style really encourages you to keep flipping and not rest on a page too long. And Nosferatu is a slower, more contemplative story, which his style of drawing does not necessarily lend itself to. This kind of strong tension and introspective confrontation that we get on the cover is not brought to the story as much by the art, unfortunately. And I do respect that Narwhal is trying very hard to provoke that attitude over the course of the story. And he succeeds in some places, especially, again, in the final third of the story, because his illustrating chops are coming a little bit more into sync with the kind of illustration necessary to provoke that mood. But for a lot of the story, his sense of flow and animation does not serve this story as well as I think it could. Um, it's definitely worth his continuing to progress in that direction if he wants to tell more content, slower, more thoughtful stories like this that get that contemplative attitude. Um, Certainly go for it, but I don't think it's all the way there yet. So if you're very interested in following Narwhal's progression as a storyteller, this is definitely a story worth having. And if you're a fan of silent films, he does a great job evoking a lot of the old-timey sense of very careful progression, thoughtful shot setup, and visual storytelling in this book. So if you're a fan of silent films, this is definitely worth checking out. If you're looking for an adventure story or a story with a lot of gambits like you usually get from Narwhal, this isn't it. And if you're just looking for a good vampire tale, this really isn't that either. There's a lot in here that is very different from the classic vampire tale. It's a good take on it, I think, but you're going to have to be ready for a heterodox take on vampires as you read this book. All in all, I would say that if you are a fan of any of these kinds of stories, it's probably worth your time. But if you are a casual reader and you don't know a whole lot about this area of cinema, if you don't know Narwhal storytelling, if you're not really interested in that, and if you don't care a whole lot about vampires, I would give this book a pass. I'm not upset that I got this. I really like it. I think there's some great visual storytelling in here. But just as a fun book to pick up and read, I don't think this has as much to offer audiences these days as the original film did. That said, I intend to hang on to this book. I'm not sorry I picked it up at all. Make of that what you will. Anyway, let me know what you think of this down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. Let me know what you can use those as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.